Good evening, and thank you for coming to my lecture recital instead of the USC Thornton Symphony concert, a few buildings over there. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come here and sharing your evening with me, and for me to share my evening with you. Tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit about Samuel Barber, briefly outline his life, and talk about the pieces that I will be performing tonight, which are the Piano Sonata, Opus 26, as well as the solo piano version of Souvenirs, Opus 28. Named after his paternal grandfather, Samuel Osborne Barber II was born March 9, 1910 in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Westchester is about 30 miles away from Philadelphia. His mother, Marguerite McLeod Beatty Barber, or Daisy, was of English and Scottish heritage. Daisy moved to Westchester in 1885 and married Roy Barber, a young doctor. Samuel also had a younger sister, Sarah, who was a close companion to him as youth. Some of his earliest songs were written for Sarah. Family photographs show the family gathered at the piano. Daisy would be seated at the piano while the children had songbooks in hand. Here's a picture of the family from one of the sources that I was researching. Roy, Samuel's father, initially wished for Samuel to have other goals rather than composing. He wished for Samuel to have more conventional childhood activities like sports. While recalling his childhood, Barber stated, and I quote, "I was supposed to be a doctor. I was supposed to go to Princeton, and everything I was supposed to do, I didn't." Maybe that's why I like him so much. This leads me to a letter that he wrote to his mother when he was age 9. So I'm gonna go to the next slide and then go back. Notice to mother and nobody else. So I chatted with Samuel Barber, and I will share it with you now. So here we go. Dear mother, I have written this to tell you my worrying secret. Now don't cry when you read it, because it is neither yours nor my fault. I suppose I will have to tell it now without any nonsense. To begin with, I was not meant to be an athlete, and just so you know, that's how he spelled it. I did not do a typo. I was meant to be a composer, and will be, I'm sure. I'll ask you one more thing. Don't ask me to forget this unpleasant thing and go play football, please. Sometimes I've been worrying about this so much that it makes me mad, not very. Love, Sam Barber II. Those are mighty powerful words for a 9-year-old. Other influential family members were his maternal aunt, Louise Beatty Homer, and her husband, Sidney Homer. Louise studied voice and acting in Paris, leading her to become a celebrated contralto for the Metropolitan Opera starting in 1900. She stayed there for about 20 years. Sidney Homer was a composer, serving as a guiding figure for Barber's quest to compose. Barber's musical talents manifested early, teaching himself piano at age 6. His parents immediately recognized his talents. While in Westchester, his parents pursued the best piano teacher they could find, William Hatton Green, who studied with Leschetizky in Vienna. Green concertized with solo recitals and often accompanied Louise Homer and other singers passing through Westchester. Barber studied with Green until 1924, when Barber entered the Curtis Institute when he was only 14. Even through his rigorous musical training and copious composing, he still managed to be an excellent student in high school. He was president of the music club as well as the drama club and editor for the yearbook, members of the Latin and the French club, while obtaining first prizes in junior and senior essay writing contests. Some people just have it all. As involved as he was, he never strayed from his passion to compose. Seeing as their child could not be persuaded to be anything else, they brought Barber to play for Harold Randolph, who was the director of the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore at the time. After performing for Randolph, it was arranged for Barber to spend Fridays at the newly established Curtis Institute while continuing high school in Westchester. 14-year-old Samuel Barber was the second person ever to enter the Curtis Institute of Music in October 1924. While there, he established himself in 3 areas of study. He studied piano with George Boyle and later Isabel Vengerova. Emilio de Gogorza served as his voice teacher. Lastly, his composition and music theory teacher was Rosario Scalero. Barber had 3 majors at Curtis, dazzling his peers with his virtuosity and his versatility. He had transformed from a shy and reserved child to being witty and fun to be with, according to his friends at the time. His charisma and charm made anyone whom he was talking to the center and focus of his attention. Later in life, this attractive quality garnered him loyalty from artists to perform his music. He was indeed the star of Curtis, and friends dubbed him as the 4th B. A mention of Rosario Scalero is important. He did not focus on Barber's compositions. Rather, he focused on counterpoint, forms, and rules. He instilled in Barber respect for the tradition of music leading up until then. After several years at Curtis, Barber met Giancarlo Minotti, who had just arrived from Italy. Minotti could not speak a word of English at the time, and Barber, of course, was fluent in French and Italian. How convenient. Their friendship at Curtis was the start of a productive and personal relationship that would last throughout most of their lives. Intimidated by the handsome, remarkably gifted, and charming Samuel, Minotti was intellectually and emotionally attracted to him. Homosexuality and gay relationships were hardly discussed, if at all, in 1928. To those who knew them at Curtis, Barber and Minotti were simply inseparable friends. Barber's middle years saw prolific output and considerable success. He had the honor of writing many commissions, such as the Cello Concerto, Opus 22. This was a commission from Kusevitsky, and Raya Garbozova was the one called to premiere it. 2 other large requests, I'm going to go slightly out of order of my slides, are from G. Schirmer, the publishing company, are the Piano Concerto, Opus 38, to have John Browning premiere it, and also the Piano Sonata, which you will hear tonight, Opus 26, premiered by Vladimir Horowitz. The sonata was for the League of Composers' 25th anniversary. Some of Barber's other important and popular works are his First Symphony, Opus 9, Adagio for Strings. The version of Adagio for Strings that we are most familiar with is an adaptation for string orchestra, which is taken from the 2nd movement of his string quartet, Opus 11. His Violin Concerto, Opus 14, Knoxville, Summer of 1915, Opus 24. Vanessa, Opus 32, which is a large 4-act opera with Minotti as the librettist, and a work that would lead to his demise, Antony and Cleopatra, Opus 40. Antony and Cleopatra was a 3-act opera premiered at Lincoln Center in New York in 1966, so he was 56 at the time. It was poorly reviewed by critics and audiences, which left Barber heartbroken. Even though Barber and Minotti extensively revised it, it never gained popularity until Barber's death. Barber was unaccustomed to rejection of a work, especially with all the obtained fame in his 20s. Unable to slough off his depression, Barber and Minotti parted ways, but still remaining friends. Barber spent his last years in New York City. He composed sparsely and found comfort in alcohol. He suffered several health complications, including a stroke in September 1980 when visiting Minotti in Scotland, and passed away January 23, 1981. His family members released the statement. The family and friends record with the greatest sadness the passing of Samuel Barber, who gave them a unique joy and to all the world his music. I'd like to spend a moment talking about his composing. Whenever he received a commission, he invited the assigned soloist to come over to his house to play for him for several days. He noticed all their strengths, all their weaknesses, and wrote to exploit the full coloration and sounds that the instrument could obtain, like the use of sostenuto pedal in the Piano Sonata. You will also notice use of high ranges and low ranges of the keyboard. When writing his piano concerto for John Browning, Barber asked John Browning what his teacher, Rosina Levine, would make him do for warm-ups, which include double thirds, double sixes, and as a result, the piano concerto is plagued with double thirds and double sixes, which left John Browning in a big disarray. He still performed it wonderfully. Each commission and composition was a deep and personal investment ever since his early songs for Sarah to his later works. Now I'd like to talk about the sonata, Piano Sonata. This is a quote from Barbara Hayman, who is the author of one of the largest biographies of Samuel Barber. Perhaps no other of Barber's works, except for the Adagio for strings, has had as stunning an impact on the American musical world as his sonata for piano. Its premiere was a landmark event, the first time an American piano piece of major importance was played by an internationally renowned virtuoso, Vladimir Horowitz. Irving Berlin and Richard Rodgers commissioned the work in 1947 as part of the 25th anniversary for the League of Composers. Horowitz liked Barber's writing, even though he felt American composers did not write for the piano. Here's a quote from Horowitz. "Copland has some good things, but they are not pianistic. I like pianistic music," whatever that means. Barber immediately accepted the offer, but also immediately ran into trouble finishing the sonata. What was normally an easy endeavor for Barber drew out to a 2-year mission. He thought he could finish it at the American Academy in Rome, but was unproductive. He tried again in Capricorn. Capricorn is the name of the house that Barber and Minotti lived in Mount Kisco, New York. But again, unproductive. His distractions were rehearsals for Medea's Dance of Vengeance, composing his cello concerto, and sketching Knoxville, summer of 1915. In between all of this, he found time to write to his uncle Sidney Homer that he finished a first movement. Slowly churning out 3 movements, he showed Horowitz each movement, and Horowitz would help make changes. After 3 movements, he struggled to figure out the 4th movement for many months, and the story is as follows. This is a quote from Samuel Barber. "And Mrs. Horowitz called me up and said, 'The trouble with you is that you're sititko.' It means constipated. That's what you are, a constipated composer. That made me so mad that I ran out to my studio and wrote that fugue in the next day." And that has kept plenty of pianists busy since. The sonata was completed in 1949, and he wrote feeling years younger and happy. G. Schirmer had abundant faith in the sonata. They arranged for it to be published before Horowitz's premiere. However, there was a private hearing of the sonata in the director's room in the old G. Schirmer building. The audience for this private hearing included many high-profile musicians like John Carlo Minotti, Virgil Thompson, Douglas Moore, William Schumann, Thomas Shippers, Aaron Copland, Lucas Foss, Myra Hess, and Samuel Chotsanoff. Horowitz, being Horowitz, insisted that he perform on his own piano. Transporting the piano to the 7th floor of the building proved no easy task since it did not fit into the ancient and creaking elevator. As a disclaimer, there was a note announcing, quote, "For technical reasons, Mr. Horowitz will play a music room grand piano Model B." Afterwards, the public premiere was at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. on January 11th, 1950. Barber was 40 years old. Horowitz's performance was met with overwhelming success. Glenn Gunn claims the sound of the instrument has not been exploited in like manner by any 20th century composer, and Richard Keith, on the last movement, one of the most musically exciting and technically brilliant pieces of writing yet turned out by an American. And just one more quote from Olin Downs. "We consider it the first sonata really to come of age by an American composer of this period. It has intense feeling as well as constructive power and intellectual maturity. It is stated naturally and convincingly in the language of modern music." By April 1950, Horowitz was scheduled to record the sonata on the RCA Victor label, so it would be released by Christmas that year. Barber was excited because on the reverse side of the tape would be the Chopin sonata in B-flat minor, and therefore would be forced to buy his sonata as well. How sneaky and fortunate of him. After Horowitz's premiere, the popularity of the piece spread like wildfire. Horowitz programmed the piece at least 21 times within the first year. It was performed many times in the United States and Europe by many artists, including Thomas Brockman, Robert Goldsand, Frank Sheridan, Samuel Lipman, Marjorie Mitchell, John Browning, Jeffrey Siegel, Abbott Ruskin, Van Cliburn, and our very own piano faculty, Professor Daniel Pollack. Being the classicist, Barber adapts a 4-movement form for the extended piano work. As you know, there are typical and expected layouts for sonatas. The first movement is a sonata allegro form containing 1, an exposition, 2, a development, and 3, a recapitulation. We also expect 2 contrasting themes in the exposition in contrasting keys. Material used for the development comes from the first theme, and a return to the home key in the recapitulation. The second movement is typically a slow movement. The third, a fast triple meter movement like a scherzo. And anything goes for the 4th movement. This is a crude generalization of hundreds and hundreds of years of sonatas, but these are the ideas that Barber studied throughout his life. The piece is in E-flat minor in accordance with the key signature. However, Barber incorporates some modern techniques like using 12-tone rows, even though I had mentioned that there is a key center. Other familiar keys are still alluded to even during his 12-tone sections, which we normally assume do not have a key. Here are the beginning few bars of the first movement. The sonata begins abruptly with angular, almost circus-like rhythms, like this. The second theme is a lyrical melody over a 12-tone row. You'll see in measure 23, the left hand is the 12-tone row, and there is the melody in the right hand. This is a contrasting theme and a contrasting character change. The resolution of a more mellow mood stems out of the tension of the first angular and jagged material. A transition settles into C minor with repeated octaves in the bass. Sorry, you can see the markings in my score. When this happens in the recapitulation, the transition settles into E flat minor. These are allusions to keys that are familiar to us, rather than the stereotypical nebulousness of 12-tone music. The movement ends as it starts with an abrupt thud very low in the keyboard. This is the second movement. It was widely accepted that the second movement of a sonata be the slow adagio movement. However, since Beethoven, composers have accepted the change to possibly have the scherzo movement before the adagio. Barber, being the fourth B, is no exception. Since the first movement ends in a low register, the scherzo starts in a very high register to exploit differences in color and sound. Although mostly in 6/8 time signature, Barber will toy with us partway through during his circus-like right hand, mixing the 3/4 meters with the written 6/8. Barber avoids thick chords in this movement, maintaining lean sonorities so there is nothing heavy about it. The end is fleeting and whimsical in G major. Third movement. The haunting and eerie adagio is seldom without a mesmerizing pulse. We also notice elements of 12-tone technique in the first measure with 6 dyads. The dyads repeat throughout the movement and sometimes transpose and arpeggiated, which we see in the third measure. And this creates a 20th century interpretation to the older form called Passacaglia, which is a repeated harmonic progression. Nebulous and wistful, the movement becomes dense and is a stark contrast to the maniacal circus beforehand. The clusters and tense intervals could show sadness and intensity from a funeral. Also, this ends the way it starts, quiet, slow, and subdued. Barber mentions that this movement is an outcry from the tragedies of World War III, which is what Professor Pollack wrote in my jury comments. The fourth movement is arguably the most famous movement. It is widely performed merely as a stunt piece. Another hearkening to older forms, Barber wrote a fugue as his fourth movement. Barber makes use of many fugue writing devices. First is the opening statement, followed by the statement again, a fifth above, or in this case, in the bass voice. And counter statements, typical of fugues from J.S. Bach's time. Fugues also have development sections which create the bulk of their composition. Barber employs common techniques like inversions of the subject, augmentations of the subject, retrogrades, and stretto. This movement also ends like the whole piece started, with a powerful thud. Next, I'd like to cover Souvenirs. This also was a commission for Barber from the Ballet Society. The suite contains 6 dances, a waltz, schottische, pas de deux, two-step, hesitation tango, and galop. A quote from Barber: "One might imagine a divertissement in a setting of the palm court of the Hotel Plaza in New York, the year about 1914, epoch of the first tangos. Souvenirs, remembered with affection, not in irony or with tongue in cheek, but in amused tenderness." He specifically mentions the Palm Court because it was a sentimental place for him. He recalls childhood visits to New York, and his mother would take him there for tea. He also met a fellow pianist turned friend, Charles Turner, in 1950. A favorite activity of theirs in New York was to visit bars with a two piano team performing sophisticated arrangements of popular music. Charles Turner encouraged him to write something in a similar, lighthearted vein for the two of them to perform, to which they have performed at many parties and gatherings. Originally a four-hands piece, the piece has been orchestrated by Barber himself at the suggestion of American writer Lincoln Kirstein, as well as arranged for piano solo, which is what you will hear tonight. The premiere of the orchestrated ballet was November 15, 1955. The waltz is a popular genre in piano literature, much in the likes of Chopin, Schubert, Clementi, and Beethoven, although the last two composers mentioned wrote it purely as dance music. The waltz begins to take more serious forms of concert music like Liszt's Mephisto waltzes or Ravel's La Valse. It is a dance in 3/4 time with emphasis on the first beat. It looks a little bit like, what? It looks like this. So, I'm going to demonstrate a simple box step. So here is my box. And then I'm going to, the leading roll is you start with the left foot. So apart, side, slide, and then apart, slide. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. The schottische, this doesn't work. Okay. The schottische is a bohemian dance in double time, reminiscent of a slow polka. Even though it is German, is the German spelling for the word Scottish, it really has nothing to do with the country Scotland. Sometimes it would even be referred to as the German polka. So the steps are step, 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 hop, step, 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 hop, step, hop, step, hop, step, hop, step, hop, step. Okay. It's a partner dance, so I hold my partner and we start with the outside leg. We've got step, 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 hop, step, 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 hop, step, hop, step, hop, step, hop, step, hop. Repeat, and there are many variations. The third dance is the pas de deux, which is French for step for two people. Talia Mara explains the pas de deux as traditionally containing 5 parts. There's the entrée, or the entrance, of both dancers, the adage, where the male supports the female sustained poses, pirouettes and high lifts. Then there is a solo variation for the male, solo variation for the female, and then the coda, which is a climax for both dancers. One of the most popular examples would be from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker or Sleeping Beauty. I am not going to demonstrate a pas de deux. So I have wonderful YouTube to show us. Very, very beautiful dancing. The fourth dance is a two-step, and this is the only dance that has an American origin. It's a fast ballroom dance that became popular in the 1890s. It has evolved into a popular country western dance. The two-step can be found in marches like John Philip Sousa's The Washington Post, and typically in piano music, they are found in modern ragtime music, like William Albright's Grand Sonata in Rag. The rhythm goes quick, slow, 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 slow. Very popular in line dancing. The fifth is the tango. In all my research, I could not figure out why it was called hesitation tango, so I will just call it tango. The tango is a Latin American dance in duple time. A composer very popular for tango pieces is Astor Piazzolla, who is from Argentina, and the tango is an Argentinian dance. The typical rhythm for the habanero rhythm, resembling in dotted eighth, 16th, eighth, eighth. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum. Although the example I have on my slide is in cut time, but the rhythm is still the same. So the steps for that, it's important to keep your knees together, but your feet have to be apart. So the basic movement for that is etc. Remember, feet apart. The last dance is called the gallop, which is another quick dance in duple meter. It is literally named after the galloping movement of horses, unlike the popular Gangnam Style. The rhythm is typically quick notes that lead to a strong beat. For example, dotted eighth dotted quarter, eighth dotted quarter. Ba-dum, ba-dum, bum bum, bum bum. Sorry, it's very small. Thank you again for coming. We're going to take a quick pause so we can have a set change, and then I shall play. So, thank you.